one thing the Slavophiles and the Westernizers could agree on um, was a contempt for Ukraine. One thing that Belinsky and Pogodin could agree on was a contempt for the idea that there is any such thing as Ukrainian culture, or if there is, it's inferior to Russian culture. This is one point on which both the Westernizers and the Slavophiles could find common ground.
James Verini is an American long-form journalist and author who writes for The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, National Geographic, and many other outlets. He's a contributing writer at the New York Magazine and National Geographic. His works have won a National Magazine Award and a George Polk Award. He is also the author of They Will Have to Die Now, Mosul and the Fall of the Caliphate, about the battle to retake Mosul from ISIS. On Ukraine, Verini's work and reporting arc includes In the Trenches of Ukraine's Forever War from January 2022, Surviving the Siege of Kharkiv, and the book we're going to be talking about today, which I will hold up. And of course, a description of it is going to be in the description of the video. That is The Theatre, Witness to the Massacre in Mariupol. James, I'm delighted to welcome you to the channel.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you. I'm a long-time viewer, first time visitor.
Yeah, well, fantastic. That's great. That's great to hear. That's fantastic. And yeah, this book is profoundly moving because I
Thank
think
you.
and an important one as well because I recently I've got some sort of friends here who do sort of qualitative research into opinions and views on things. They track populist opinion in the UK, the propagation of Russian propaganda narratives. They were shocked and horrified that even in Britain, amongst the public who are broadly pro-Ukrainian, there has been a dropping off of awareness of Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol. Not that people are bad or even disinterested, they've just forgotten or never quite really took on board the depths of it. So I think this
Mm,
is an incredibly important piece of work.
thank you. Thank you. I agree.
Yes, of course, and people should buy it to remind themselves of it. But what's your personal motivation for writing something like this? Because we've had many,
Hmm.
how the war's gone and the position in the trenches. We've had lots and lots of war coverage.
Yeah.
This seems to me an absolutely unique way of covering it.
Thank you for saying that. There's the sort of there's the practical route to this book by way of my work as a journalist, and then there's a sort of a larger, more personal route that goes longer back. But I'll tell you the practical route, which is the summer before the invasion began, in summer of 2021. I went to Ukraine to begin reporting, knowing or sensing that something was up. You didn't have to be a genius to know that there might be an invasion with the Russian buildup on the borders. And I reported up and down the front line. It was an active front line even before the invasion in Donbas, a shooting war that had been going on for 7 years by that point. Reported from Donbas, as you mentioned, and then as soon as the full-scale invasion began, went back and reported from Kharkiv and Kherson and other places. But as any reporter working in Ukraine will tell you, it's extremely difficult to work with the Ukrainian military. They like to control the narrative where journalists are concerned, but they're also, especially where foreign journalists are concerned, the Ukrainian military is very protective and they don't want people getting killed, especially foreign people. And as you recall, a number of foreign reporters were injured or killed right at the beginning of the war. So the Ukrainian military, mostly out of wanting to protect us, wasn't allowing foreign reporters such as myself. I was working for the New York Times Magazine, wasn't letting us near the action, and nor were individual soldiers really allowed to talk with us. There were press minders everywhere. So immediately from the start of the war, I decided that I was going to focus more on the civilian experience, partly out of a matter of necessity and practicality, because it was much easier to talk to the civilians than the soldiers. But also because I found in places like northern Kharkiv, which was being besieged when I was there at the very beginning of the war, that There were actually not really many soldiers around. There were only civilians taking care of themselves and living in the basements in these high-rise apartment buildings in northern Kharkiv as as these apartment buildings were being bombed. Um, and so I began to focus on the civilians trapped in this war. And I did that in Kharkiv and in Kherson, and then eventually with Mariupol. And I a few days after the Mariupol theater was bombed on March the 16th of 2022, I met the first survivor from the theater in a hospital in Zaporizhia, to which she and her mother had escaped. And we got to talking. Her name was Olga, and she spoke excellent English. She was in quite a state, as you can imagine, but she was very articulate and eloquent. And we kept in touch. And then I thought, what more astonishing way to write about the civilian experience of this war than the most what I call the defining and probably the most lethal civilian atrocity of the war, which was the bombing of the refugee shelter in the Mariupol theater. So I kept in touch with Olga, and then over the course of months and years, tracked down every survivor I could, and wrote a long piece for the New York Times Magazine about the theater massacre, and then thought, I've got to turn this into a book. At first, I was thinking I'd write a book about the war generally and the experience on the front line, like my first book. But then an editor, a publishing company in New York said, no, of course, you've just got to do the theater. Just focus on the theater. And it was one of those of course that's right. That will be the best possible book. That's the practical side. Sorry for taking so long to explain that.
No, it's important
There's a
background.
more personal side, which is that um, m my first book, They Will Have to Die Now, about the war against ISIS and the Battle of Mosul, that is in many ways much more of a frontline account. I was embedded with the Iraqi soldiers for many months and the Kurdish soldiers. And a lot of that book is, as Michael Hare, the great Michael Hare, who wrote Dispatches, once described the Vietnam War as men hunting men. And that's what my first book was largely. It was soldiers and jihadists trying to kill one another. And I did write about the civilian experience in that book, but I for maybe more for personal reasons than anything else, I thought I don't know that I have the emotional strength to do another book about people constantly trying to kill one another. What if I do a book about people in the midst of a war who are trying to help one another? It may sound schmaltzy, but in it's a cliche, but it's true. In war, you see both the worst and the best of people. And I thought, what if I do an entire book about a war, but it's not really about a war. It's set in a war, but it's about a group of people who, for the most part, are showing the best of themselves, and bringing out the best in one another. They are not trying to kill one another like the people in my first book. They're trying to help one another, and they're doing so in the midst of the most consequential war in Europe since the Second World War and the worst siege of that war. What if I was able to tell a story of hope and courage and survival? Um, it's a war story, but it's not about killing.
And what I think you achieve, which is fascinating to hear, is what it seems to me you're trying to draw people out of the mire of statistics. Obviously, you are giving that sense of people who survived, how many who died. We've got to get a scale of the tragedy. But it seems you're trying to rescue individuals as
Yeah.
a way of actually telling the story. I mean, is that's I assume a sort of conscious technique there, but why is
Yeah.
that so powerful?
Well, I began as a newspaper writer in New York, and newspaper stories, unless it's a profile, newspaper stories for the most part are too short to give the reader any sense of a person if you do it right. And book writing is that you can focus on people rather than on issues or groups. And for me as a reader and as a writer, the greatest pleasure in nonfiction as well as fiction is getting into the minds of individual people. The I think the point of writing is to allow us to experience other people's experiences as far as we can. What Jefferson and I think before him Burke called the moral imagination. Um, Sorry, there's a bug on my screen. Um, and that is what that is to me, that is what writing is for. Um, I always begin a magazine assignment or a book thinking about the individuals. Who are the individuals who are going to comprise this story? How can I get the reader into their minds and into their experiences? Um, with the theater, that was especially challenging because I only knew of the theater sort of post facto, post disaster. I was reporting in Ukraine from the start of the invasion, but because Mariupol was encircled and besieged so quickly, we couldn't get into it or anywhere near it. The closest we could get was Zaporizhia. But everyone in Ukraine and the world, you'll remember in the first 2 weeks of March of 2022, was following the story of the theater, those remarkable satellite images of the Mariupol theater with children, deti, written on either side of it. And then some handheld footage from within the theater, as you recall, escaped Mariupol miraculously because all electronic communications had been cut off and found their way into social media and then into the news media. So everyone in Ukraine and everyone around the world saw the images of this theater, and everyone was rooting for at the time, it would have been 1,500 people in the theater to either get out or, stand up to the Russians once they arrived. There was also a sense of foreboding if you saw those images from within Ukraine. You knew that those signs that read children could be as much a provocation and an invitation to bombing as they could be, a prevention of bombing. And indeed, that is what happened, of course. But so I met Olga, whom I mentioned a few days after the bombing, um, and then I had to. None of the survivors, of course, whom I interviewed, are any longer in Mariupol. There are survivors living in Mariupol. I've talked to a couple of them, but not extensively. I had to travel around Ukraine and Europe to find these survivors and to interview them. Um, and um, um, when you sit down with these people, interviewing them over a video call is one thing. And that's how I wrote the first New York Times Magazine story. But when you sit down with them in their kitchens or in a cafe or for hours and days, um, and their humanity comes through to you, um, that the importance of that and the meaningfulness of just their individual humanity experientially supersedes any collective experience. They all had the same collective experience, but then within it, they all had their individual experiences, which is why I structured the way I did as an ensemble piece spread out among probably, I would say eventually the book probably has too many subjects. I think it might be slightly confusing for a non-Ukrainian or reader. Um, but that's the one of the pitfalls about spending a lot of time with people and wanting to write about them is they all seem important when you actually sit down to write.
And of course, it must seem more visceral as well. But it comes back to this idea, doesn't it, that if you have a crowd of people, or in this case, hundreds of people, um, it's very difficult to elicit empathy. You can get shock,
Mm,
you can look at it analytically. But I
mm,
think there are various psychological studies that the optimum number of tragic stories is
yeah.
one. That the most empathy you can elicit is to
Yeah.
tell the story of one person.
Yeah, I wish I had had that in mind when when I wrote the book. Yes, and with the theater, there was a particularly abstract quality to it because everyone saw the images of the theater before it was bombed, with children written on either side, and then the next image anyone saw was the blast radius that had been the theater, but there was almost no footage. There was no footage of the bombing itself, and just a tiny bit of footage taken within the theater and outside of it after the bombing, as you saw the dust-covered people streaming from the basement, the corpses laying on the ground. But unfortunately, the people who shot that footage, who were refugees in the theater or arrived at the scene shortly after the bombing, most of them escaped Mariupol through Russian checkpoints. And in order to get through the Russian checkpoints, they had to scrub their phones of any imagery that the Russian soldiers might take umbrage with. So we have almost no footage of the bombing or the aftermath of the bombing, footage or still imagery. So it's left to our imaginations in a way that, say 9/11 was not, right? We have endless imagery from that. Or the Battle of Mosul, which I wrote the previous book about. With the theater bombing, we have very little imagery, so it's even harder to imagine their experience, and empathize with them, which is another reason I wanted to write the book and why I probably included too many experiences in the book.
And something else I think is interesting you write about, which is that a lot of people's impression of the war is trenches and battlefields and obviously, Russians being erased from a distance by drones, etc. But actually,
Yeah.
I think you make the important point that the real background of the war is homes, villages, destroyed cities. It's very
Yeah.
much embedded within a civilian landscape, which of course
Yes.
makes the horrors that much more callous in some way.
Yes. Yes, right. This is not, needless to say, this is not and has never been a war of tank columns facing off one another against one another in fields in the way that the Second World War was in Ukraine, Um, um, this is like most contemporary wars, largely an urban war. And it takes place amongst and in people's homes, apartment buildings, and individual homes. Um, in certain battlefronts in Ukraine, the civilians, completely cleared out. Um, in others, such as Kharkiv, where I reported, they stayed. In large part because they had nowhere else to go, but also because they refused to go. In Mariupol, they stayed during the 81-day siege because they could not escape the city. So necessarily, it became a war about civilians just as much as combatants. In Mariupol, there were between 400,000 and 500,000 residents before the siege. And the siege force was comprised of thousands, the Russian siege force, and there were thousands of Ukrainian troops there, but nothing like there were numbers of civilians. And of course, eventually, probably the civilian casualty numbers exceeded the combatant casualty numbers. Um, I also like writing about the civilian experience in war because it is the experience that most of us would have, right? When we think about wars or we read about wars that our fathers or our grandfathers fought in, or we see a war on the news, we like to think, oh, I would be fighting. No, probably not. Probably most of us would be cowering in our basements. Most of us would not be joining up, would not be volunteering, would not be press ganged in the service. Most of us would be like the people in this book who are everyday normal people, laborers, actors, students, teachers, doctors, whose homes were destroyed and who found themselves in this refugee shelter having to live with one another. Um, I really like spending time with soldiers and writing about their experience and generals as well. But that is not the most common experience of war. The most common experience of war is the civilian experience.
Another point while we're on the theatre, because I'd love to turn also to the roots of the conflict, because you've written about Dugin and the sort of ideological perspective. But just staying on this idea of atrocity here, I think you make the point that there's this huge symbolism, the fact that this appalling massacre took place in a theatre, a place of
Mm,
culture. And it's not just the incongruity and the inhumanity, but it also tells us something about the purpose that
yeah.
Russia has in the invasion, which is the erasure of obviously anyone who's going to resist Russification, but erasure of anything that challenges the Russian imperial manufactured identity, i.e., Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much there, of course. To begin with, there's just the most sort of appalling lethality of it. As one of the survivors of the theater put it to me, it was on that day, March 16th of 2022. She said, "That's the day we realized why the Russians were really here. They weren't here to fight with Ukrainian soldiers. They weren't here to fight with NATO, as they claimed. They weren't here to push out all the foreign fighters they claimed were massing in Ukraine. They were here to kill us." And by us, she didn't mean Ukrainian soldiers. She meant us, Ukrainians. They're here to kill us. And she's absolutely right. Russia was there to try to put an end to the notion of Ukraine in every form. It was there. Putin had for years been denying that there was any such thing as Ukraine, that there was any such thing as a Republic of Ukraine, that there was any such thing as independent or indigenous Ukrainian culture, that there was any such thing as a Ukrainian language. There was only Greater Russia, and Ukraine was merely a part of that, an important part, as he liked to point out by pointing to the Kievan Rus, and calling it sort of the origin of the Romanov Empire and of modern Russia, but only one part of Russia. Um, and in that sense, this was and is an attempt at annihilation. People use the word genocide. I don't. My legal knowledge is not enough to say whether that's true or not. But certainly, Putin's intentions were at least ideologically genocidal, as in he wanted to erase the idea of Ukraine, erase Ukraine in any way that Ukraine was different from Russia. He wanted to erase that from history. That has included over the course of 4 years attacking every form of Ukrainian cultural heritage, from churches to theaters to artworks to literature, and not just in Ukraine but across Europe. Um, and it has also included, as you point out, bombing such places as the theater. The bombing of the theater was uh, multifarious in its lethality. He was not, Russia was not just bombing a refugee shelter. It was not just bombing the location of what had been a church. It was not just bombing a centuries old graveyard. It was also bombing this theater, this municipally run, not terribly well funded, but beloved theater in Ukraine, which until very recently had actually been called the regional Russian academic theater. The Mariupol theater had been a point of pride for people who are proud about Russian culture far longer than it had been a point of pride for Ukrainians. It was only within the last few years before the theater was destroyed that they started putting on Ukrainian language performances and concentrating on Ukrainian plays. The theater. The theater, preceding the theater, there had been a church there, which had been dismantled by the Soviets, of course. And then in 1960, the municipal theater opened under Khrushchev, right around the time of what we would later call the thaw, when Khrushchev lifted the sort of restrictions on Russian culture and allowed more provocative plays to be put on, more provocative novels to be published. And the Mariupol Theater was a great point of pride for both Ukrainians and Russians. And it was a center of Russo-Ukrainian culture, if we can use that term, for 60 years before it was destroyed. And its destruction um, points up not just the perfidy of the war, but also the cruel irony of the war, which is that Putin claimed that he was there that the Russian troops were there to save oppressed Ukrainians from their government and neo-fascists and NATO, and he always claimed that it was his respect for Ukrainians that led to this war, and his desire to preserve Russian history within Ukraine. But as one survivor of the theater bombing put it to me, if he's so intent on preservation, if he has such reverence for czarist cities with beautiful czarist downtowns like Odessa and indeed Mariupol, then why is he bombing the shit out of them? It's either or. You can't have it both ways, man. You know,
Well,
either
that's the
either you either
yeah.
you re either you revere the Russianness of this place and want to preserve that, or you want to destroy it. And that probably points up um, the the worst paradox, which is to say the profoundest truth in Putin's mind, which is the the Eros Thanatos paradox, which is that he was probably being sincere in both things. He probably really did believe that he was destroying in order to preserve.
And I think it also highlights the idea that maybe the regime actually has contempt for any culture that it can't control. And that would include Russian dissident culture or a culture that doesn't fit within a canon of approved works.
Yes,
When they've
yes,
been moving in that direction, and
yeah,
the second tier cultures as they see it, the
right,
colonized cultures even more so.
yeah,
Um, I
yeah.
I just sort
Although
of top.
Jonathan, on that point, as you and I were discussing before, there again, you have this delicious irony, which is that oftentimes Russians and Putin, most notably, don't see just how satirical and anti-authoritarian and anti someone like Putin so many great Russian writers were. Putin pointed in one of his speeches. Putin pointed to Gogol, who wrote in Russian, and he called Gogol a Russian nationalist because though Gogol was from a place people call Ukraine, he wrote in Russian. No, he wasn't, you idiot. He was deriding people precisely like you, Gogol. Yeah.
He was absolutely ripping them in the most
Yeah.
satirical, dark, satirical fashion possible. And there's this other narrative, isn't there? Brotherly nations. And, it's like you're not behaving like a brother to Ukraine, therefore we have to teach you what these brotherly relations are. In my head, it's like that only works if you're talking about brothers like Cain and Abel. It's not normal brotherly
Right.
relations.
Or like an 18-year-old brother who is 6'4" and a 3-year-old brother, who weighs 20 pounds. That sort of brotherly relationship
Yeah, and
with the power all on one side. Yeah.
with a lot of abuse thrown in. And
Yeah.
talking of abuse, that leads me to the next question because I had a conversation with, and I won't name who it was with, and I mentioned the what I termed the unique sadistic behavior behind the Russian invasion. Because I mean, this is the
Mm.
first war in my life where I've actually spoken to the victims of
Yeah.
and witnesses to torture, and
Yeah.
obviously found it profoundly harrowing. And speaking to this author and academic, he was like, well, bad things happen in every war. I think that was the phrase.
Yes.
It seems to me, and I want to be put right if this is not the case. It seems to me that there is a particularly bestial behavior of the Russian armies at scale,
Mm.
and that it is also systematic in terms of the methods of torture,
Mm.
the setup, the use of, say, police stations, the fact that these, how should I say it, these factories of torture
Yeah.
follow a common pattern, and
Yes.
sadistic behavior seems to follow a common pattern as well, and including the sadism to their own troops.
Mm.
I'm not sure a relativist interpretation of this, like this stuff happens in war,
Hmm.
is nearly adequate. But I'll
There's
hand it over to you because you've seen a lot more than I have.
Yes. There's a lot there, which is why I'm furiously scribbling notes over here. In terms of the unique sadism, I'm afraid I must agree with your academic friend, but not because I've read a lot about war, though I have, because I've covered a lot of wars. Um, um, I don't know that there's anything particularly unique in the methods of sadism of the Russian and Chechen and other troops uh, working in Ukraine and intelligence officers. I don't know that there's anything unique or special in the methods, but there's certainly something, if not unique, then particular and um, rare in the ideological sadism, which again is whether or not this constitutes a genocide, I am not legally qualified to say. But we certainly know that ideological genocide, if you like, spiritual genocide, a genocide of identity, is precisely what Putin is after. And if that is your starting point, if your goal is to, as much as anything, erase a republic's history, erase its notion of its own identity, erase the idea that it is its own place, as opposed to just a part of Russia. If you begin with that impetus, then of course you're capable of anything, whether it be bombing the Mariupol theater, or whether it be I did a lot of reporting in Kherson, in a town that had been occupied for a long time before being liberated, called Belozerka, and spoke to a lot of the people who were tortured in the police stations, and even some people who were allegedly doing the torturing, and interviewed, Ukrainians who'd been abused and arrested, and those who had also been complicit with the Russians. Um, when you begin with this idea that we are, if we're not going to erase this place from the map physically, then we are going to erase the idea of it. Then of course you're capable of anything. There is also what people refer to as the Russian way of war, which is not a new thing, of course. Um, um, God knows how many Russian soldiers in the Second World War were killed not by Germans, but by commissars. Commissars who were in every unit and every squad and would shoot anyone who was not moving forward, who would shoot anyone for ideological heresy. And of course, there were the hundreds of thousands of people whom Stalin threw into the meat grinder without necessity. Um, I think eventually, what, 20 million Russian dead by the end of the Second World War. I think around 20 million. And the real tragedy of that, to my mind, isn't those killed by Germans, although that's bad enough. It's all of the Russians killed by other Russians during the course of the war. So one could make the argument that there is a sort of Russian mode of war. This also was the case in Afghanistan during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. The Russian word, which you may know, translates literally as rebelization, turning everything into rubble, which is oddly close to ruble. But you could make an argument that there is this Russian way of war that is perhaps particularly indifferent to life. I haven't interviewed enough Russian soldiers to say whether that's what was going on in their minds. I think they would tend to deny it.
Well,
But
the
you take,
regime is
but
indifferent to life itself,
yeah.
so it's a logical extension, actually, of their internal
I
treatment of their
mean,
own citizens.
yes, I would always urge on you, you made the point earlier that this is a book about individuals and not about sort of an abstract view of a collective experience. As far as possible, I want to get the reader into the minds of each person. Whenever I speak with people who can't find it in their hearts to sympathize with any Russians whatsoever, I like to remind them, many of the men and now women fighting on the Russian side, but still mainly men, they didn't choose to be there. This is not a volunteer army, right? These are
Oh, yeah, I'm not
there's
sure about that.
there are some
Yeah.
volunteers, needless to say, but as you know, many of the Russians are conscripts.
I
They
was
are conscripts.
That I
So,
think is a difficult statement because there's the phrase there's conscripts that there's also kontraktniki. There are
yes,
those who've gone for
certainly,
monetary
certainly,
gain.
certainly.
That's a huge number,
Yeah,
actually.
absolutely, absolutely. In my experience in Bilozerka, and this is talking to Ukrainians who got to know the Russian soldiers, and these are Ukrainians who came to sympathize with the Russian soldiers whom they got to know, many of whom were not ethnically Russian. They were ethnically Kazakh or from Central Asia, and they at least claimed to have been press ganged. Um, if the Ukrainians living in Belozerka under occupation could find some sympathy with these people, I think perhaps we can as well. But the soldiers aside, we then, have to remember that there are many Russians in the Russian populace who disagree vehemently with this war. We have to sympathize with their predicament, which is that if they say so publicly, or even maybe privately, they can be arrested, they can be run out of the country. And if they want to make that point publicly, they will certainly have to leave the country. Um, I think we need to find it in our hearts, not to mention our minds, just being rational about it, that we have to make the distinction between the regime and the people, and even the distinction between the regime and the fighters, or at least a good many of the fighters. Sadly, I'm an American now, so people often say this to me, just as they did in Iraq 10 years ago, when Trump was first coming into office. They say same thing to me now, which is, don't worry, we know there's a difference between you and your government. I think we can afford average Russian people the same distinction, and the average Russian foot soldier the same distinction.
I have our
I
yeah,
think more than that,
yeah.
I think we have to. I think if we're going to be rational about it, as well as feeling about it, we have to make that distinction.
I have a slightly more, you might call it mercenary approach, or it has to be slightly more analytical in that I have to judge
Yeah,
whether it's useful to have a Russian on the channel. And as you know, there are plenty
yeah.
of Russian voices on the channel. So I've had to think of some framework, which actually has been quite useful. And I've tried to take it away from
Yeah.
emotional concepts like sympathy and so on,
Mm,
and move it onto something a little bit more like a grading system. So I have a series of questions. You
mm,
know, what should happen to Crimea? Um,
yeah.
are you prepared to talk about decolonization? Not
Yeah.
sign up to it, hook, line, and
Yeah.
sinker, but
These
are you
these are
prepared to
these are
think about it?
advocates of the war you've had on, or critics of the
No,
war?
I would never have an advocate of the war
Critic
on.
okay,
No, no.
critics of
So
the war.
this
Okay,
would be
yeah.
people are either critics of the regime, the war, but of course
Yeah.
that comes in a whole spectrum of different people.
Yeah.
And I would say, okay, well here are the questions. Are you prepared to and have you raised money for the Ukrainian armed forces? Do you
Yeah.
place Ukrainian victory above Russian internal politics? Do you? And there's a whole series of questions like that.
Mm.
What's your relationship to the Kursk incursion? These are all trigger points where you can sort of, the number of Russians who will be prepared to look at those questions or for
Yeah.
whom they're a red line, it reduces dramatically as you go through this little questionnaire. But
Jonathan, may I ask the
yeah, yeah.
Russians, and forgive me for not already knowing this from watching the show, which I love, but the Russians you've had on, are any of them still living in Russia?
No, no,
Well,
because I wouldn't want to place anyone in danger.
yes.
Oh, no,
Right.
that's not true at all. No, actually, I have had one on, an extraordinary, eccentric and bold individual who is actively trying to repatriate Ukrainian children.
Mm.
And he's a sort of he's an outrageous personality living in St. Petersburg. And during the interviews, he'd be glancing out of the window, thinking that car's parked a little bit too long out there. I'm getting a little bit anxious. An
Yeah.
extraordinary kind of individual, but
Yeah.
deeply traumatized by
Yeah.
everything. But you can tell he's got this incredible personality. He's got a
Yeah.
little bit quiet the last year or so, and to
I
figure
mean,
out how he's doing. Yeah.
I think as a Briton, as an English person, Um, you don't have to, if I may,
Mm.
you don't have to feel the sort of shame that I now feel as an American under Trump, and that fellow feels under Putin, right? One of the I live in London, and one of the reasons I love living in the UK is it's sort of a saner version of the United States, right?
Yeah.
There's a sobriety and a sanity and a
Yes.
civility here that has persisted. There's a reason you've not had a civil war since the 17th century. Um, and one thing that Britain's perhaps under Boris to some extent, one thing that Britons have a hard time understanding is is the um, is the emotional complexity of shame when you are right when you are a sober-minded person with sympathy, living under a regime that is both irrational and unsympathetic. I no longer live in the United States, but of course I feel that shame vicariously every day, looking at the publications that I write for. Um, all of which is to say that uh, uh, the sort of grading scale that you give the Russian guests, we can't expect them to score perfectly on that, can
Oh
we?
no, I don't. But it
Yeah.
filters out. It's like it helps me to understand. And this is like there's this concept, isn't there, of good Russians, which a lot of people use and has been used before. I find that to be deeply problematic because it's inherent on a moral judgment. It's entirely
Mm,
subjective, and it's
mm.
also very easy to manipulate propagandistically and for historical mythology to twist it. It's a deeply unhelpful concept. So my concept is useful and useless Russians,
Ah,
which takes it away from any moral judgment. And then you ask specifically, in
right.
what way are you being useful?
It sounds like
Um,
you've read both Bentham and Marx.
yes, I have actually. Yes, not that I subscribe
Yeah,
to
to
Marx,
either
but it's
exactly.
yeah to
Yeah.
either. No, but
Yeah.
it's much more useful because it's like I have to ask
Useful,
whether
you mean useful in the sort of in the Benthamist utilitarian sense of the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
I mean it more specifically, but yeah, ultimately it ladders up to that because I believe that freedom and democracy is the greatest good on a
Mm-hmm.
macro historical
Mm-hmm.
scale. For me, is the concept of useful is are they contributing to Ukrainian victory,
I see.
or
Okay.
will having them on
Yeah.
not be anywhere near that goal?
Yeah.
And I've decided that I'm not going to get mired in conversations that don't ultimately contribute towards Ukrainian victory. And
Right.
that's and then there's some little subsets of that
I
to
mean,
decide whether they come on or not.
you know that I agree, and I've spent a lot of time there writing about these people in an effort to get readers to understand their plight and understand what it is they want. But that is a high standard to hold people to.
It
Like
is.
it's a high standard even to hold Ukrainians to.
Yes.
Whatever you do that
Yes.
isn't in service of victory is useless. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And of course there are different ways of being useful. But I think it's it's not I don't feel it's useful to bring people to the audience that don't increase their sum total of insight and understanding.
Mm,
And if someone fails the criteria I've set out, it suggests to me that they haven't done the internal work on themselves. They
mm,
haven't challenged the mythologies and let's say ingrained programming. They haven't
yes.
deprogrammed themselves. So really, there'll be no utility for bringing that individual in front of the audience.
We're getting a bit far afield
We
here,
are, yeah, yeah.
but I mean, it's a fascinating point, and what I would say is this. Again, I think you're very fortunate to be a Briton and to be English. You
Ah, man,
were,
I'm not. See, I studied in Scotland, and my relatives are Irish and from Central
oh,
Europe.
my, sorry.
So, but
You take my point. You take my
I
point.
do. I don't think here.
You were educated in systems that were uh, by comparison to Russian schooling, and even by comparison to American schooling, non-ideological. Um,
More or
you,
less, yeah. Well,
yeah,
they
there
have
was
their own
probably
flaws,
there
but
was
yeah.
there. Of course, you had you had to learn about the monarchy, of course, and wear a poppy on Armistice Day, but. I would say compared to Russian education, even Russian education in the very brief respite of
Mm.
the 90s, and compared to American education, and also inundation and popular culture, you have, I won't call it a luxury, you have the benefit
Wow.
of sort of being free of this, of the ideological training of the Cold War, which
Yes.
even
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
as an American, going to school in the 1980s, I was inundated in that even in a very liberal private schools, I was inundated that in both in education and popular culture. And so will have been many of your Russian friends. If they weren't inundated in the Soviet Cold War propaganda, then and they had the great good fortune of going to school between 1991 and 2000. If not the Soviet propaganda, then they would have been inundated in the 25 years of Putin Kremlin propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really, that's not the generation. I mean, my generation, as you say, there are people who would have had their initial schooling under the Soviet system
Yeah,
while it was, at the point where it ceased to really have any impact, but people were still going through the
yes.
motions of
It's
teaching it.
very
Yeah.
hard to, and it doesn't matter how open-minded and how sympathetic one is and how much one
Yeah.
supports Ukraine's cause. It is very difficult to escape that ideological inundation. And I tell you this not as a Russian, but
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
American. It was when you see Rambo when you're 6 years old. Doesn't matter how much I read, I've read since then. It's still formative in there in a
Yes.
way
Yeah.
that's very difficult to reverse.
There are very, very few individuals who can go back and re-examine every foundation of their belief
Right,
system. I mean, we're
right,
talking
exactly.
0.01% of the
As
population or
as
something.
as
Yeah.
as Slavoj Zizek likes to point out, ideology is the most effective and is effective precisely because it's invisible, because
Yes.
you don't know it's there, because it's unconscious.
And we're not immune to it. Now, we might have a slightly milder version. We might have actually gone some way to rectifying the historical ills, but the English have really not enough shame. I'm not sure how useful shame is, but not enough awareness of what English imperialism has inflicted on the other peoples of these islands. So
Mm,
we do have a version of that, and we do
mm,
have a lack of consciousness. I always call it almost an imperial unconscious arrogance to not really understand the effect we have on Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and
mm,
how we're perceived by peoples there who are
mm,
far more aware of their history. So
mm.
for me, that actually was a useful tool
Yes.
in then looking at Russian imperial attitudes, which don't just come down through the education system, they come down through almost like a societal mythology,
Mm,
translated to different tones, different classes, different levels of education. But you find these extraordinary
mhm.
historical myths,
Yes.
which every country
Yes.
has, but they
And a
are,
sort of a presumption of power, a presumption
yes,
of superiority.
but they're also instrumentalized in Russia in a way that they're not anywhere else. I mean,
Yeah.
in America, yeah, you could say that the right wing and the GOP will instrumentalize certain versions of history for power, but there's an alternative story.
Mm,
In Russia, you have the unique monopoly, as it were, of narrative,
mm,
which
mm,
makes it particularly toxic.
mm, mm.
Well, I wanted to turn with that. I mean, that links quite nicely to Dugan and your studies there, because I want to understand, how ideological. I know you're not going to be committed on the idea of genocide, but
Mm.
how ideological is this sense of the inferiority of Ukrainians,
Yes.
which very much fuels the behavior of soldiers that we've seen.
Hmm.
Because if you don't see, if you really thought these people are your brothers, if you
Yeah.
really thought you have commonality, I don't think you would see that
Yeah.
level of sadistic cruelty that we see.
Yes. Um, we're getting quite far afield from the book, but it's good. It's good. I like it. So you read the essay I wrote for the New Yorker about Dugan, but the essay is about what I think are the intellectual and philosophical roots of this war, and they are not in the 1990s. Some of the roots are in the 1990s, and nor are they in Putin's supposed increasing belief that NATO is trying to incur on Russia via Ukraine. I think if you really want to understand this war and Putin's thinking, perhaps more his unconscious thinking than his conscious thinking, you have to go back at least to the 19th century, and to the point at which the Russian Empire, the Tsarist Empire, very consciously decided to split from the West, and this was under Nicholas the First, and the impetus was the Crimean War. When the British and the French sided with Turkey against Nicholas the First and the Russian Empire in the Crimean War. Before that, it's funny to think a mere 2 centuries ago, Russia saw itself as a protege of the West, and then under Alexander the First, after the Napoleonic Wars, as the savior of the West, but a willing savior. Alexander the First, like all of the czars, had been steeped in Western European culture much more than he was in Russian culture. They spoke French at the court, and spoke German. It wasn't until Nicholas the First and the betrayal, as he saw it, of Western Europe against Russia in the Crimean War that Nicholas the First said, the West is not with us; they are against us. The West meaning Western Europe, and you then have the movement known as Slavophilism, which is all of these intellectuals surrounding Nicholas the First and the latter czars, who talk about this rivalry between the West, now including the United States, and Russia. And as they talk about it more and more people become convinced of it, that there's something antithetical between the West and Russia. And whereas before, under Peter the Great and under Alexander the First and under Catherine, there had been this reverence for Western European culture, and the idea that Russia ought to be imitating Western European culture. There was now, beginning with Nicholas First, this idea that Russia, in fact, had a much older indigenous culture of its own. There's no reason we should be speaking French. There's no reason we should be speaking German. We shouldn't be reading Dante and Dickens. We should only be reading Dostoevsky and Gogol, and Tolstoy. And as that argument went on in age, it hardened and reached farther back into history, so that by the end of the 19th century, you have this debate between what are known as the Westerners, the Westernizers, and the Slavophiles, over which direction Russia should go. Should it go west, or should it go east? Essentially, should it look more towards its Byzantine roots, or more towards the French and the English and the German that our leaders used to speak at court? And eventually, the decision was firmly in the camp of the East. Where am I going with this, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the initial question?
We were heading towards Dugan and the
Oh, yes,
ideological
sorry,
underpinnings
sorry,
of the,
sorry.
yeah.
Exactly, sorry. So you have this Westernizing versus Slavophile debate going on throughout the 19th and early 20th century. The creation of the Soviet Union puts an end to that, right? Um, um, but that debate revives in the 1990s. It revives when Putin is making his way up politically from the KGB and FSB through the mayor's office in St. Petersburg, and then through the Kremlin. Again, this century-old debate, is renewed in the 1990s. What are we going to revere? Are we going to revere the West with its capitalism and its popular culture? Russians are asking themselves in the 1990s, or are we going to revere our own culture? Are we going to look more to the East than the West? And Dugan and his circle came down firmly on the side of looking inwardly and looking to the East, looking towards Eastern mysticism, looking towards the Byzantine roots of Russian religion and Russian culture. And that view increasingly became the popular and then the dominant and then the required political view in the Kremlin. This is the position that Putin has taken on over the course of 25 years, looking increasingly to the East, and towards religion, towards mysticism, but also towards Eastern partners, towards the Eastern roots of the Russian Empire, as opposed to its roots in Western Europe. Um, and so, Dugin's position, the position of the Slavophile, has become the de rigueur, really the only admissible position in official Russia.
And that's the interesting debate, isn't it? Because and as someone I follow who's gone into this quite a lot, Vlad Vexler, who's a sort of British Russian sort of social commentator, political
Yeah.
scientist, he would argue here that yes, do what Dugin does is he tries to imagine where the regime is going to end up.
Mm.
And he sort of preemptively positions himself so he looks prescient, so he looks like
Yeah.
he's, you know, influencing where it's going. What he's really
Yeah.
doing is predicting. But then the other
Yeah.
question is the regime adopting these concepts because they have an intrinsic belief?
Yeah.
Or are these simply seen as useful instruments for the retention of power and control over resources?
Well, I think, of course, the answer is both. There are people who sincerely believe this. There are people who, like Putin, who probably just find it useful. There are people who, like Dugan, both believe it and find it useful. Sorry, something, Jonathan, I meant to point out when I got off on my tangent about 19th century Westernizers versus Slavophiles. The main point I was trying to get to there that I forgot was one thing the Slavophiles and the Westernizers could agree on, um, was a contempt for Ukraine. One thing that Belinsky and Pogodin could agree on, was a contempt for the idea that there is any such thing as Ukrainian culture, or if there is, it's inferior to Russian culture. This is one point on which both the Westernizers and the Slavophiles could find common ground. Either the inferiority or the non-existence of the Ukrainian language, of indigenous Ukrainian literature, of Ukrainian expression of any form. If it existed, it was inferior, and it probably didn't even exist. Was basically their common position.
Here's the irony, the Reds and the Whites also
Yeah,
pretty much agreed on the same thing, and it has been
yeah.
posited by several speakers on the channel that if the white forces, well, they need to be a bit more organized, but if they had adopted Ukrainian nationalism and had Ukrainian independence as part of their platform, they could very well actually have won in Western Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to reimpose the imperial dominance for exactly the
Mm-hmm.
reasons, and
Yes.
therefore never built
Yes.
built a power base.
Right. There was this contempt for the idea of Ukraine, begins with, I think it was it was Alexander II who first prohibited the printing of Ukrainian language literature and publications and the teaching of Ukrainian language, which was a policy that was carried on through Nicholas II and then
Yeah.
eventually revived under Stalin.
And there
But
were many
yeah,
edicts over
but
centuries, but you
yes.
say he accelerated and deepened the
Yeah, I mean, which
purge.
of,
Yeah.
of course is ultimately ironic too, as even Putin himself points out, the Kievan Rus began in Kiev, right? That was the originating point, and both of the languages came out of Old Church Slavonic simultaneously. Um, but yes, it's a very interesting historical counterfactual to ponder. What if Russians from Nicholas to Kerensky didn't have this taught contempt for Ukraine and as an individual thing? What if instead they had relied on the strengths of Ukrainian independence, Ukrainian individual identity? History would have turned out differently at so many turns.
That's it. And I'm hoping one day to have such a conversation on the channel about that and the idea of the roots of Russian white fascism, as it were, some of which
Yeah.
are present in Putinism. Um, as we wrap up, what's your next projects? What are you thinking of, and where to channel this empathy and the energy and your research is it going to be on Ukraine, or are you looking at other theaters?
I always love a chance to go back to Ukraine. In fact, I'm hoping to go back in June. Penn Ukraine is having an event just around Mariupol in Kiev in June, which I'd like to go for. The problem, as you know, in reporting on Ukraine now, is that the drone war has changed everything. Everything. Even I was last there in 2024. I began reporting there in 2021 and then reported through the beginning of the war and then for the next several years. But it's impossible to do that anymore in the way that I used to. You cannot move around on the front because of the drones. You can't even move around near the front. You have to be underground. Um, you cannot show your face, much less get into a vehicle. The drone war, it's completely changed the nature of warfare, as you know. It's also completely changed and frankly made in many ways impossible reporting on war. So sadly, and I don't want to sound callous about it, but there's not a whole hell of a lot for me to report on there not because there's not a lot going on, but because it's going on in a very different way, in a way that I've never experienced. When I covered the war against ISIS and the Battle of Mosul, ISIS had drones that were dropping little grenades on the Iraqi Humvees, but it was nothing like this. This is, of course, on a completely different level. Um, where am I going to direct my sympathies next? Well, of course, I think everyone should be looking at Taiwan, and I am fantasizing, if that's the right word, about beginning to travel to Taiwan to get to know people there, to get to know the civil defense forces that are being formed and the individual groups who are creating citizen militias, much like they were in Ukraine after 2014, between 2014 and 2022. It could be that we will see something not unlike the Donbas in Taiwan.
This
Uh,
year, next year, I'm going to be looking at that as potentially imminent or as a blockade rather than a full-scale invasion. I know you're not a military analyst, but
I'm the wrong guy
no,
to
you're
ask.
the wrong guy to
I'm
ask
the
that.
wrong guy to ask. All I
You
know is
must have
that
a sense that something's coming, the oncoming storm, if you're going to invest your time by
Jonathan,
going out there.
I wish I was that well sourced or that intelligent. I am not. As we discussed, one reason I started reporting in Ukraine in the summer of 2021 before the invasion was I sensed something was up, but I'm no sage. I wanted to go because the world was oddly peaceful at the time, and Donbas was a war that was happening, but that everyone had forgot about in the summer preceding the full-scale invasion. No, do not ask me for prognostications about any coming wars.
But let's say, the fact you're going out there is interesting, and what you're going to find there is interesting and potentially useful if
Mm,
and when it kicks off. And
yeah.
yeah, no, I can
I
I
would
can see
love
that.
to go write about the war in Burma, but talk about a war that's difficult to cover. I've been trying to find ways in. It is so fragmented. If people think the Donbass is complicated, they should take a look at the Burmese civil war. But that's for another podcast.
It's another conversation entirely. For today, though, James, let's have a quick reminder to people that this is absolutely, I think, one of the most unique books to come out of the hundreds that have come out now about the war. And there are many, many great works by great people, but this is an absolutely unique angle on it, and a unique perspective and way of covering that, as I say, with empathy. So thank you so much for coming on, and huge pleasure. Hopefully, first of many conversations. But yeah, massively appreciate. What we've talked about both off camera and on camera today.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a great pleasure, and I so appreciate your knowledge of Russian history and of the scene. You're rare in that sense. There are many people online who are pontificating and bloviating about this war who don't know a fraction of what you know. So it's a pleasure just to watch you, and more of a pleasure to be on speaking with you.
Thank you. The cruel irony is, without the war, none of that would have probably come to light, and I would have taken it to the grave with me. But
I know.
I feel a
Sadly,
sort of
as I
perverse gratitude
as I
to be able to
often
share it.
often I sadly have to look at a country where I've worked and I say terrible for Iraq, but good for James Verini. He gets to write another book.
It's another book, another
Yeah.
article, which is commended. Thank you so much, and I look forward to reading more
All right,
from you.
Jonathan. Thanks again. Good seeing
Cheers.
you.
Let's unpack the book, The Dark Heart of Russia, because it helps to explain how we got to this point. It's edited by me, Jonathan Fink, the creator and host of the Silicon Curtain podcast. It's published this month by Gibson Square in London and is already available for order and delivery online, though officially the PR release will coincide with the Phantom Victory Day parade in Moscow on May the 9th. 30 interviews, 30 voices selected from over 1,000 interviews that have been conducted on this channel. And the lineup that we have put into this book reads like a who's who of the people Moscow would most like to silence. Bill Browder, Garry Kasparov, Fiona Hill, General David Petraeus, Peter Pomerantsev, Luke Harding, Mark Galeotti, Keir Giles, Anders Puck-Nielsen, Alexander Etkind, Yuri Felshtinsky, General Ben Hodges, and many, many more. And with a strong set of Ukrainian voices included, it could be no other way. Volodymyr Ermolenko, Alena Holoshka, Sasha Dozhik, Olga Takaryuk, and Alexander Romantseva, among several others. And the timing is not accidental. We are releasing this book precisely as the Kremlin's central myth, the myth of Russian victory, Russian strength, Russian inevitability, is being shredded in real time. Ukraine matters, and I think this book matters, and our support for Ukraine is the only way of stopping Russian imperialism from its eternal outward expansion and the destruction that it brings in its wake.